The sound tore through the air like lightning, splitting a tree in half, sharp, unforgiving, final. I didn't know it was a gunshot at first. Maybe I didn't want to know. But then came the second sound, one I would recognize in my deepest nightmares, my daughter's scream. Fragile, broken, then silence, deafening silence. The kind of silence that swallows you whole. I remember dropping the groceries right on the driveway, oranges rolling into the gutter, a carton of eggs cracked and leaking into the pavement, my phone skidding under the car. None of it mattered. My legs moved before my mind did. I sprinted across the lawn, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But as I got closer to the door, I knew something was wrong, terribly, violently wrong. The screen door was ajar, my front door wide open, and then I saw it, a smear of red, blood, just inside the hallway. My soul left my body in that moment. I stumbled inside, nearly tripping over myself, screaming my daughter's name so loud I thought my lungs would tear. Sophie, Sophie, where are you? There was no reply, only the hum of the fridge and the sickening echo of my own panicked footsteps slapping the hardwood floor. Then I saw her, crumpled by the kitchen island, her tiny frame lying awkwardly like a broken doll, one hand clutching her abdomen, blood pooling beneath her. For a second, time stopped. The sunlight coming through the window seemed too gentle for this kind of horror. I dropped to my knees beside her, pressing my hands against the wound, my own fingers slipping in the warmth of her blood. Her eyes fluttered open. "Mom, it hurts." Her voice was barely audible. My baby, my little girl who needed a walker just to get across the room. My daughter who loved butterflies and painted stars on her ceiling. Now shot, bleeding out on my kitchen floor. I screamed for help. My mother, who had been in the backyard garden, came rushing in and collapsed at the sight. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, dialing 911 with fingers soaked in blood. The operator's voice was calm, too calm, as if this was just another day. Gunshot wound. 7-year-old female. Conscious but bleeding heavily. I was sobbing. I didn't even realize I was yelling until my throat started burning. "She's just a child. Please hurry. Please." The operator kept me on the line, but I could barely hear her. My entire body was focused on Sophie, keeping her awake, whispering to her that she was going to be okay, that help was coming, that I was right here, that I wouldn't let her go. The ambulance arrived in minutes, but it felt like hours. Red and blue lights lit up our pristine little street, the one with manicured lawns and white fences. Neighbors started peeking from behind curtains, one or two stepping out onto porches, pretending to look concerned but doing nothing. The EMTs worked quickly. I rode with her in the back of the ambulance, holding her hand, listening to the beeping machines and the rushed medical jargon. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the side rail. At the hospital, they took her from me. I wasn't allowed past the double doors. I stood in the hallway, blood still on my clothes, staring at the no entry sign until everything around me blurred. Then came the questions: the officer, the nurse, the social worker. Who had a gun in your house? Was it an intruder? Was this domestic? Did you know the shooter? And each time, I struggled to say the words out loud. It was Karen, from across the street, HOA board member. She came over. I wasn't home. She had a gun. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief. Karen? The same woman who hosted the bake sale? The one who always carried her dog in a stroller? The woman who waved to everyone on trash day? Yes, that Karen. I didn't know everything yet, not the motive, not the sequence. All I knew was that the woman I trusted to water my plants while we were away had just shot my disabled daughter. And while the doctors tried to save her in next room, I was left in the waiting area trying to remember how to breathe. The hours that followed were a blur: stitches, surgery, transfusion, endless paperwork, and a steady stream of investigators and apologies that meant nothing. I kept thinking about that morning, about how normal it had been. Sophie had pancakes for breakfast. She laughed when I spilled syrup on my shirt. My mother had just gone outside to trim the roses. And by noon, everything had changed. You don't expect to need a trauma counselor for a child who's never even scraped her knee. You don't expect your kitchen to become a crime scene. And you certainly don't expect the person responsible to be someone who smiled at you every morning for 3 years straight. Someone who quoted HOA rules like scripture. Someone you thought was just strict, not dangerous, not evil. As the sun set behind the hospital windows that night, I finally allowed myself to cry without holding back. The kind of cry that shakes your whole body and empties everything inside you. Because once you see your daughter in a hospital bed with tubes and machines keeping her alive, something inside you dies. Something changes forever. And through all of it, the chaos, the blood, the horror, one thought kept echoing in my head over and over again. I never imagined the woman who fired the gun was the same one who waved to us every morning. We moved into the Willow Creek HOA community with the kind of hope that fills your chest so full it almost hurts, in the best way possible. After years of stress, apartment elevators that barely worked, and neighbors who yelled through the walls at 3 a.m., this move felt like stepping into a long-awaited dream. The kind of dream that made you believe maybe, just maybe, everything was finally falling into place. We had spent months looking for a house that felt like more than just four walls. For my daughter Sophie, who was born with muscular dystrophy and relied on her walker to navigate the world, we needed wide hallways, a ground floor bedroom, and a safe yard where she could just be a child. Willow Creek seemed to offer all of it and more: wheelchair-accessible sidewalks, quiet tree-lined streets, and an HOA that prided itself on community values and neighborhood harmony. It was painted as a haven for families, clean, quiet, and tightly managed. I didn't mind the rules. I welcomed them. After all, what could go wrong in a place that cared so much about order? From the moment we pulled into the driveway of our new home, I saw Sophie's eyes light up. The porch swing, the flower beds, the tiny birdhouse hanging from the old oak tree in the front yard. She leaned over from her booster seat and whispered, "Mom, can we stay here forever?" I smiled, not knowing how precious those words would become to me later. That first week, the neighbors came by with casseroles, welcome baskets, and handwritten notes. One woman even brought Sophie a set of sidewalk chalks and offered to host a little play date with her granddaughter. For the first time in years, I saw Sophie play outside without constantly looking over her shoulder. She chalked bright suns and lopsided unicorns on the driveway while I unpacked boxes, glancing over now and then to see her laughing, a deep belly laugh that had become rare during our time in the city. There was something magical about it. My mother moved in with us shortly after. She insisted. She had watched me raise Sophie mostly alone and said she didn't want to miss another moment. She took over the garden, planting herbs and flowers like she was painting a canvas. Our home became a rhythm of laughter, smells of rosemary chicken, bedtime stories, and board games. Even our dog, Milo, seemed calmer. For once, it felt like we had space to breathe. It felt safe. It felt right. It wasn't long before we started meeting more people. The HOA president welcomed us at the monthly meeting with a polished smile and a pamphlet that was thicker than the community directory. "We take pride in our community," she said. "Everyone plays their part." I didn't realize until later how that phrase, "everyone plays their part," wasn't a gentle suggestion, but an unspoken mandate. Still, I wasn't suspicious. I signed the paperwork, nodded through the rule book, and even volunteered to help at the upcoming neighborhood fair. That's when I met Karen. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and a comment about how lovely it was to see a young single mother making something of herself. It was meant as a compliment, I think, but it sat strangely with me. She wore pastel cardigans, pearls, and a perfume that reminded me of sun-dried linens. She spoke in a soft, syrupy voice and asked too many questions. About Sophie's condition, about my work schedule, about my mother's presence. I chalked it up to small-town curiosity, the kind that dances on the edge of nosy but doesn't quite cross it. She offered to add me to the HOA bulletin board and Facebook group. "We all keep each other informed around here," she said. "You'll fit in just fine." And for a while we did. Sophie started school just a few minutes away. Her teacher emailed me almost daily with glowing updates. Sophie is sunshine in a bottle, she wrote once. I'd never seen my daughter so confident, so sure of herself. She made a friend, Lila, who lived 2 streets down, and they'd have playdates on Saturdays where they painted their nails and made up stories about fairy kingdoms. I'd sit on the porch with Lila's mom and talk about everything from groceries to dreams, always with a coffee in hand and the sound of children laughing in the background. Willow Creek, it seemed, was everything we'd prayed for. And yet little things began to feel off. Subtle, almost easy to miss. Like the way Karen would pause when she saw Sophie's walker. Or how she once remarked during a neighborhood barbecue, "It's so brave of you to let her out like that. Not all mothers would." I remember freezing, unsure how to respond. Let her out? As if Sophie was some risk to be hidden. I smiled tightly and changed the subject. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe it was nothing. But those moments started stacking. A warning sign taped to our door after we left the trash bin out past 6 p.m. A comment about our unkept flower beds, even though my mother spent hours tending to them. The HOA newsletter began to include more and more references to maintaining standards, often with underlined sections about compliance and citations. Still, I told myself not to overthink. Sophie was happy. School was good. I was building a life here. Karen was just a little controlling, someone who took the HOA a bit too seriously. And in communities like this, wasn't that a good thing? Someone to keep order, to make sure the street stayed safe? I reassured myself again and again that we were lucky, that we belonged. But shadows don't announce themselves with thunder. They creep in through the corners, slow and invisible at first. They grow while you're looking the other way, distracted by comfort. And by the time you notice, they've wrapped themselves around everything you thought was safe. Because even the nicest communities have shadows. It started small, so small I almost laughed it off. A yellow slip taped to our mailbox the second week of spring. Violation notice. Lawn grass exceeds regulation height 3.5 inch. I remember standing in the driveway, holding the paper with confusion turning slowly into disbelief. The lawn was barely shaggy, just soft from the last rain, and my mother had mowed it the weekend before. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, a clerical error, something they'd fix with a quick call. But when I brought it up at the next HOA meeting, Karen, clipboard in hand, pearl necklace gleaming like a badge, didn't miss a beat. "We must all adhere to community standards," she said with that sugar-laced smile that never reached her eyes. "We can't make exceptions, not even for special circumstances." I blinked. What circumstances? My daughter's condition? My status as a single mother? My mother's age? The implication hung in the air like smoke, hard to pin down but impossible to ignore. Karen's words were always like that, wrapped in civility, dipped in concern, but sharpened with something colder underneath. The kind of passive aggression that wore the face of neighborly care while slowly undermining your place in the community. After that, the notices began to appear more frequently. Our trash bins were visible from the street for exactly 12 minutes after the collection truck passed. The wreath on our door was unapproved ornamentation. Even Sophie's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a sun, a rainbow, a doodle of a unicorn, earned us a warning for public surface defacement. Sophie cried when I gently told her she'd need to draw on the back patio instead. "But why?" she asked, her little hands gripping the chalk. Karen said she liked my rainbow last week. I didn't know how to explain to my daughter that sometimes adults lie with smiles. Karen became a constant presence, not in a friendly, neighborly way, but like a silent security camera with pearls and manicured nails. She walked her dog twice a day, precisely at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., and always passed by her house. She never waved first. She waited. She expected acknowledgement. And if you didn't smile or say hello fast enough, she'd pause for just a second longer, like she was taking mental notes for a file only she could access. At community events, she played the benevolent leader. Sophie would run up to her with wide eyes and giggles, offering a flower or a drawing, and Karen would bend down and say something kind just loud enough for others to hear. "You're such a bright star, Sophie." Then, the moment Sophie turned away, Karen's face would drop like a curtain falling. Blank, cold, as if my child's joy had been a performance she barely tolerated. There was one day, one I still remember far too vividly, when Sophie tripped in the driveway. Her walker slipped slightly on the sloped edge of the concrete, and she fell. Scraped her elbow, but it was the kind of fall she was used to. Brave as ever, she stood up with trembling legs and smiled through her tears. I clapped gently and cheered. "That's my girl." Karen, who just happened to be walking by, stopped. "Maybe it would be safer if she didn't play out front," she said. "This street isn't meant for that kind of activity." That kind of activity? My daughter's existence? I stared at her, stunned, my voice frozen somewhere in my throat. She patted her little dog and moved on as if she hadn't just slapped me across the face with her words. It was in those quiet moments that I began to feel it, a weight, a subtle shifting of how we were seen. Some neighbors still smiled, some still waved, but there were those who stopped chatting as we walked by. People who used to invite us to weekend cookouts suddenly forgot to send texts. One neighbor, Mrs. Hollins, who once brought over banana bread, crossed the street when she saw us coming. It was like we'd been marked, branded with the invisible ink of disapproval that only glowed in HOA light. And at the center of it all stood Karen, always watching, always just trying to maintain harmony. The worst part wasn't even the citations or the passive-aggressive commentary. It was the way Karen treated Sophie in public versus in private. At HOA events or public spaces, she made a show of being sweet. Loud compliments, kneeling down beside her, touching her hand like she was blessing a saint. But at the park, when there weren't any other adults around, she once told Sophie to be careful not to get too close to the other children, as if she were contagious. Sophie told me about it that night, curled up in bed, eyes unsure. "Did I do something wrong, Mama?" My heart shattered in pieces I couldn't even find to put back together. I wanted to storm across the street to demand Karen keep her poison to herself, but I didn't. Not then, because in communities like this, confrontation always boomerangs. The one who speaks up becomes the problem. Things continued to unravel, quietly but consistently. Our garden beds, which my mother worked on lovingly every week, were deemed inconsistent with HOA design standards. We were told to remove the sunflowers. Sunflowers. My mother cried that night. "They remind me of your father," she whispered. "He used to plant them every summer." I offered to fight it, file an appeal, but the fatigue had already begun to set in. We didn't want trouble. We just wanted peace, a place to live without feeling like every day was a test we were bound to fail. I began documenting everything, taking photos, saving emails, recording meetings. I didn't know what I was preparing for, only that I had the gnawing feeling that something worse was coming. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was tightening a noose, slowly, steadily, and the more we complied, the more power she seemed to draw from it. Sophie stopped going outside as often. She said the yard felt tight. She couldn't explain it. She just didn't feel happy there anymore. And I knew exactly what she meant. Our dream home had started to feel like a dollhouse with invisible strings, strings that Karen held in her perfectly manicured fingers. And still she smiled. That same frozen smile every time she saw us. The kind that doesn't reflect warmth, but control. Domination hidden beneath lipstick and HOA bylaws. And I finally began to understand it was never about grass height, trash bins, or sidewalk chalk. It was about power. And she had made us her target. It didn't take long for Karen's obsession to evolve from passive-aggressive HOA notices to something darker, something suffocating. At first, it was just her usual policing. She'd pause longer outside our house on her dog walks, eyes scanning our lawn like a hawk eyeing prey. But then I started noticing patterns. The way she'd stand at her window, phone in hand, whenever Sophie played outside. The way her curtains shifted when I pulled into the driveway, like she was tracking our comings and goings with militant precision. One evening, I stepped out to grab the mail and saw the light from her living room flick off the moment I looked up. It gave me a chill I couldn't shake. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just paranoid from all the citations and stress. But it wasn't paranoia. Karen was watching us, and not in a concerned neighbor way. This was surveillance disguised as suburban etiquette. It got worse when Sophie's therapy moved to the house. Her physical therapist, Miss Clarice, came twice a week to help her work on mobility, balance, and confidence. The sessions were gentle but full of laughter. Sophie's joy was the soundtrack of those afternoons. But a week into the new routine, I received an email from the HOA. Excessive noise complaint reported during weekday afternoons. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Sophie's giggles were being labeled as disruptive noise? I asked our next-door neighbor, Mr. Finch, if he had filed the complaint. He looked startled. Of course not. I barely hear a thing. Your daughter's a sweetheart. That left only one possibility, Karen. The very next day, as if confirming my suspicion, Karen flagged me down while I was unloading groceries. She didn't even say hello. I've had to move my dog's nap schedule, she said with a smirk. All that squealing from your little one, it's like a daycare over here. Her tone wasn't just condescending, it was venomous. I gritted my teeth and walked away. But inside, I was fuming. Who weaponizes a child's laughter? Sophie didn't understand why her playtime was now being limited. Am I too loud, Mama? She asked one afternoon, her eyes brimming with hurt. Karen said I'm like a siren. I froze. Karen had spoken to her, again, this time directly. I knelt down beside Sophie and tried to explain that some people just didn't like happiness, didn't understand difference. But even as I said it, I felt the deep sting of helplessness. How do you explain cruelty disguised as adult authority to a child who still believes the world is kind? The final straw came one Thursday afternoon. I was inside folding laundry when I heard Sophie crying outside, loud, panicked, gasping cries that made my chest tighten. I dropped everything and rushed out. She was sitting on the front step, her walker tipped over, her palms scraped, tears streaming down her cheeks. I scooped her into my arms. What happened? Between sobs, she choked out the words. Karen said I was trespassing. She yelled at me, said I don't belong here. I was stunned. Sophie had been playing with sidewalk chalk again, but this time on our own driveway, well within the property line. Karen had come across the street just to scream at her. My daughter, a disabled 7-year-old. I held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, trying to calm her trembling. Something inside me snapped. I marched across the street. Karen was out front, watering her roses, as if nothing had happened. What the hell is wrong with you? I demanded, my voice shaking. She looked up, startled but quickly composed. Excuse me, she said, tilting her head like I was the crazy one. He points it ahead. You yelled at my daughter. You made her cry. She was playing on her own driveway. Karen didn't flinch. She was close to the sidewalk. She said coolly, it's a liability. And besides, she startled me. That walker of hers makes such a noise when it hits the pavement. I cut her off. You have no right. You don't speak to my child. Ever. Karen smiled again. That same brittle manufactured smile. I was just trying to maintain the peace. If your daughter's presence causes disruption, maybe consider alternate activities for her indoors. That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just control masquerading as concern. I turned around before I said something I'd regret, but my hands were clenched into fists the entire walk back. I reported the incident to the HOA board. I wrote a formal email, attached photos, statements from neighbors, even included a voice recording from Sophie's therapist who had witnessed Karen yelling from across the street once before. I waited 2 days, then 3. Finally, I received a response. Thank you for your concerns. While we empathize with your situation, HOA board member Karen has maintained her actions were in accordance with community guidelines. No further action will be taken at this time. My jaw dropped. Empathize? No action? They had completely dismissed everything. Karen wasn't just protected, she was untouchable. Her word, her perception of events, held more weight than documented truth. The system that promised fairness and harmony had been weaponized by the very person who claimed to uphold it. From that day on, the shift was undeniable. Karen knew she had power, real power, the power to harass without consequence, the power to isolate. She didn't just want to control us, she wanted to remind us every single day that we were at her mercy. Sophie started sleeping with the lights on. She flinched at doorbells. My mother, once full of sunshine and stories, began gardening less and sitting silently in her room more often. Even I, a woman who'd survived heartbreak, loss, and sleepless nights as a single parent, I began to feel brittle, like one more confrontation could snap me in half. Karen escalated her tactics. She took photos of our house and sent them to the HOA for alleged violations. She stood outside and recorded when Sophie's therapist arrived. She sent friendly notices reminding us to refrain from excessive visitor traffic. At night, I'd catch her headlights shining briefly into our windows as she circled the block, like she was checking to make sure we were still in line. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a monitored zone. Every door creak, every giggle, every visitor. Tracked, judged, filed. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to run. But where would we go? This was our home. Sophie had her school, her therapist, her little garden patches. Karen had invaded every inch of our life, but I wasn't going to let her erase us. Not yet, because something deeper was building. Not just fear, not just resentment, but resolve. Karen may have had the HOA in her back pocket, but I still had the truth, and I was starting to gather it piece by piece, day by day, because no one controls a mother's voice when her child is in danger. And no matter how many rules Karen clung to, she hadn't yet learned the most important one. You don't get to hurt my daughter and walk away. The week before everything came crashing down was a descent into a kind of dread I had never known before. It started with something that seemed small, like most things with Karen did, but quickly mutated into something twisted and unignorable. It was Monday morning when I found the first note. Folded neatly and tucked under the welcome mat, the paper was cream-colored, lined like a formal letter, but its message was far from polite. In a crisp, blocky handwriting that felt oddly sterile, it read, "Your child needs to be kept inside. This is a quiet community." No name, no signature, just that one sentence laced with ice. My hands shook as I read it. I stared at the houses across the street, at Karen's pristine shutters and flower beds, wondering if she was watching me from behind them. Was this her way of warning me? A test? A message? I didn't know then, but my gut whispered what I refused to accept. This wasn't going to stop. It was only going to escalate. By Wednesday, the air around our house felt heavy, like we were breathing through layers of glass. Sophie was quieter than usual. She asked me to walk her to every room, even in broad daylight, and wouldn't go to the bathroom without leaving the door slightly open. She had started wetting the bed again, a habit she'd overcome months ago with the help of therapy and gentle routines. When I asked her what was wrong, she just whispered, "She watches me." My stomach twisted. "Who, sweetheart?" I asked, even though I already knew. Sophie looked down at her feet. "Karen." That night, I sat awake in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed, the TV on low, just to drown out the quiet, the shadows in every corner feeling like threats. At around 2:17 a.m., I heard something. A soft rustling, followed by the briefest creak of wood. I rushed to the front window and saw a shape standing at the edge of our lawn. Not on it, but close enough to make their presence felt. A figure, feminine, still, watching. And then just as quickly, it stepped back into the dark and disappeared. I installed cameras the next day. 3, all motion triggered. One above the garage, one by the porch, and one near Sophie's window. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was precaution. The footage didn't lie. On Thursday at 11:42 p.m., the camera near Sophie's window caught her. Karen, creeping along the side of the house, flashlight off, clutching something in her hand. She didn't knock, didn't speak, just looked through the glass, right into my daughter's room. My heart dropped when I saw the footage. Sophie had been asleep, thank God, but the idea of Karen that close to her, watching her, was something that broke something primal inside me. I reported it to the police. They came, took a report, glanced at the footage, and nodded slowly. "We'll look into it," one officer said. But technically, she didn't trespass. She stayed off the private line. I wanted to scream. What would it take? An actual break-in? A body? A headline? I sent the footage to the HOA as well. Their response? A single, sanitized email. "We have reviewed the video and spoken with Ms. Karen. She mentioned she was concerned after seeing movement and wanted to check for intruders. It appears to be a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? The same woman who had written us up for a 3-inch lawn and sidewalk chalk was now peeking into my daughter's bedroom window. And that was just her being concerned. It wasn't just negligence. It was willful blindness. They were protecting her because she was one of them. A donor. A board member. A woman with power disguised as professionalism. I didn't know what terrified me more, Karen, or the fact that the very people who were supposed to protect this community were helping her gaslight us into submission. Then came Friday. I woke up to find Milo, our sweet golden retriever, curled up by the back door, barely breathing. Vomit pooled near his bowl. His eyes were glassy, his tail limp. We rushed him to the emergency vet, where they confirmed he had ingested rat poison. Somehow, somewhere, we didn't keep any in the house. We never had. The vet asked if we had any enemies. I blinked at her, and the answer crashed into me like thunder. Karen, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to imagine someone being so cruel, so methodical, that they would target a family dog just to send a message. But at that point, I no longer had the luxury of disbelief. Milo survived barely. The vet said another hour, and it could have been fatal. Sophie cried for days. She kept asking if Karen was going to hurt her next. Saturday, I found the second note. This one was taped to our back fence. A single word in the same stiff handwriting. Control. No explanation. No context. Just that one word. As if it were a mantra. A promise. A threat. I called the police again, demanding they come immediately. They did. They walked the perimeter. Took the note. Made polite noises. But still they shrugged. Unless you catch her in the act or she steps onto your property, our hands are tied. Tied. Just like mine. Bound by the invisible threads of fear and helplessness that now strangled every part of our life. By Sunday, my mother had stopped arguing with me about moving. She packed a small emergency bag and kept it by the door, just in case. That night, I barely slept. At 3:03 a.m., the motion alert from Sophie's camera pinged again. I opened the feed with shaking hands, and there she was, Karen, closer this time, staring through the window, her hand resting on the glass, her breath fogging the pane, her eyes blank, soulless. I yelled. I sprinted out the front door in a rage, phone in hand, heart in my throat. But she was gone before I turned the corner. I filed a restraining order the next morning. It was denied. The judge cited lack of direct contact, no prior criminal record, and insufficient proof of malicious intent. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or both. Proof? My daughter was traumatized. Our dog had nearly died. Our house had become a war zone of fear. But all Karen had to do was smile in court, speak softly, and remind everyone of her position on the HOA board. And yet, through the exhaustion, the rage, and the spiraling fear, something hardened inside me. A resolve. A line drawn in blood and concrete. I began backing up every piece of evidence I had on flash drives, on cloud storage, in a folder labeled, "If anything happens to us." Because I knew something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. The tension was no longer just emotional. It was physical, thick in the air like a storm about to break. I held Sophie tighter that night, kissed her forehead, whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a woman with a grudge. This was war. And Karen had just fired the first shot. It was a bright, ordinary Tuesday, if there's such a thing anymore in our story. The sun filtered through the clouds in soft stripes across the driveway as I loaded groceries into the trunk. Sophie had insisted on staying home with her grandma, partly because her legs were sore from therapy, and partly because she just didn't feel safe outside anymore. She said she didn't want to go to the store in case Karen was watching. That sentence alone should have broken me, but I swallowed it, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and told her I'd be right back. Just a quick trip, some milk, her favorite strawberry yogurt, and a pack of watercolors she had circled in last week's craft catalog. That's what I remember most, that I went to buy something as innocent as watercolors while a storm I couldn't imagine was forming just 3 blocks away. I didn't know that while I was scanning barcodes and counting coupons, my daughter was about to be caught in the unthinkable. My phone rang as I was loading the last bag. It was my mother. The moment I picked up, I heard it, the sound that will live with me until the day I die. Her voice, shrill and cracked with panic. She's been shot. She's bleeding. Oh my God, she's bleeding everywhere. I couldn't breathe. My heart didn't beat, it slammed. What happened? Who? I screamed into the phone, fumbling with the keys, the grocery bags falling onto the pavement. Karen. She came inside. I told her to leave, but she just, oh God, she had a gun. My mother was hysterical. And then I heard Sophie's cry in the background, faint but real, and everything else became a blur of motion and screaming wheels and red lights I didn't stop for. The drive back was 10 minutes long, but I don't remember any of it. I barely remember pulling into the driveway, stumbling out of the car, leaving the driver's door wide open. I ran across the lawn, not even noticing that the front door was hanging ajar, its bottom corner cracked where it had clearly been kicked or slammed open. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had stepped into a nightmare. There on the kitchen floor lay Sophie, my beautiful, gentle, sweet girl, curled on her side, blood soaking the tiled floor around her like a cruel halo. Her walker was toppled nearby, wheels spinning slowly. Her favorite stuffed elephant Button was splattered with red, discarded like he had tried and failed to shield her. My mother was crouched beside her, sobbing, pressing dish towels against her side, her hands shaking too hard to apply real pressure. I dropped to my knees, grabbing Sophie's hand, trying to hold her and help at the same time. Her eyes flickered open. "Mom," she whispered, her lips pale and trembling. "It hurts so bad." I held her, careful not to jostle the injury, whispering, "I'm here, baby. I'm here. You're going to be okay." But even I didn't believe that. Not yet. Not until I knew how deep the wound was. Not until someone with training took over. Not until I saw her safe again. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Somewhere in the chaos, my mom had called 911. But those minutes stretched into eternities as I knelt in that kitchen, blood on my hands, my knees, my clothes, whispering over and over that help was coming, that she was going to be okay, that I wouldn't leave her. The paramedics stormed in, assessed her, and began working quickly, efficiently with the kind of calm I envied. I barely noticed the neighbors gathering on their lawns, watching with wide eyes and parted blinds. I didn't care who saw. I just wanted my baby to breathe. As the medics wheeled her into the ambulance, one of them asked me if I knew the shooter. I blinked at him, stunned for a moment. Then I said it. Karen, our neighbor, the woman from the HOA. The man looked at me like I had just handed him the plot twist to a psychological thriller. "She shot your daughter?" I nodded, too numb to cry. "Yes, she came into our house. She pulled a gun. She shot her." At the hospital, they rushed Sophie into surgery. A gunshot to the abdomen. Entry on the left side, close to the lower ribs. Noexidgund. Internal bleeding suspected. I wasn't allowed in. I was ushered into a waiting room with sterile walls and vending machines and chairs that felt too cold for the kind of pain I was in. My hands were still stained with her blood. I sat there, trembling, heart pounding, the beeping of the monitors in the background sounding like funeral bells. My mother sat beside me, silent now, hands wrapped around herself like if she didn't hold on tight, she'd fall apart. I wanted to scream, to destroy something, but I had nothing left but breath and grief. The police arrived shortly after. They took my statement, asked the same questions over and over. Yes, Karen had been escalating things. Yes, I had footage. Yes, I had reported her before. Yes, the HOA knew. No, they had never done anything. The officers exchanged looks, nodding, scribbling things down. One of them asked if we had ever feared for our lives. Every day I said, but I didn't think she'd actually shoot her. They told me Karen had already been taken into custody, that she hadn't resisted, that she claimed she was defending herself from a disabled child in her own kitchen while coloring. The rage that surged inside me was white hot. She came into our house, I whispered, uninvited, armed, and shot a 7-year-old. That's not self-defense. That's attempted murder. I was finally allowed to see Sophie after surgery. She was pale, hooked to wires and machines, her little chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The doctor said the bullet had missed vital organs by millimeters. That she was lucky. Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken. Hollow. Watching her lie there, fighting for her life, I thought of all the times I'd begged the HOA to intervene, all the times I'd reported Karen's harassment, all the signs everyone had ignored. This didn't come out of nowhere. This was a build-up, a culmination of power unchecked, a community so obsessed with rules that they allowed a predator to hide in plain sight. When Sophie woke up, hours later, she looked at me with wide, scared eyes. "Is Karen gone?" she asked. I nodded. "She's gone, baby. She can't hurt you anymore." Sophie blinked slowly. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "I thought I'd never see you again." I broke then, truly broke. The tears came like a flood, silent and uncontrollable. I held her hand and told her over and over that she was safe, that I was here, that no one would ever touch her again. But I knew even as I said it that some scars don't bleed. They settle deep, quiet, and permanent. In the days that followed, the media swarmed. Headlines exploded. HOA board member shoots disabled child in suburban dispute. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Karen's mugshot was everywhere. The HOA issued a hollow statement about tragedy and shock. The same HOA that ignored every single warning. The same one that protected her for years. They tried to distance themselves, but I wouldn't let them. I gave interviews. I showed the footage. I told the truth. I named names. Sophie eventually stabilized. The road to healing, both physically and emotionally, was going to be long. She had nightmares, flinched at door slams, refused to be in a room alone. But she was alive. Alive because she fought, because the bullet missed by a thread, because even after the pain, her heart kept beating. And in that fact, fragile and fierce, I found something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But make no mistake, this wasn't an accident. This was the final act in a play Karen had been writing for months. One born of control, entitlement, and cruelty, enabled by silence and complicity. And while my daughter healed, while our family stitched itself back together, one truth rang louder than any gunshot. Karen pulled the trigger. But the system put the gun in her hand. In the aftermath of the shooting, I thought there would be outrage, rallies, petitions, and outpouring of support from the community. I expected tears, casseroles, neighbors banging on our door to say, "How could this happen here?" But the silence was deafening. The day after Sophie's surgery, while she lay in recovery with tubes in her arms and monitors humming a steady rhythm, our street remained calm. Too calm. No one knocked. No one asked if we needed anything. The woman from 2 doors down, who used to wave to Sophie from her rose garden, crossed the street when she saw me bringing in the mail. And when I passed Mr. Hollins on the sidewalk, he looked straight ahead like I was invisible. It didn't take long to realize why. They were already choosing sides. Karen had told the police she acted in self-defense, that she was checking on a noise complaint and was threatened by my daughter, a disabled child who weighed 40 pounds soaking wet, who needed a walker to get across the kitchen floor. It sounded ridiculous, insulting, even, but somehow her version of events started to take root. Whispers began. I heard them in the grocery store, in the school parking lot, even in the hospital hallway. There must be more to the story. Maybe the kid startled her. You know how emotional those single moms can be. The speculation wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. Karen had spent years building her reputation as the respectable, put together woman who upheld the rules, ran bake sales, and walked her dog at exactly 9 a.m. People believed her, or rather, they wanted to. The HOA released a statement the following week. It was carefully worded, devoid of responsibility. We are deeply saddened by the recent incident involving a member of our community. While the HOA does not condone violence, we trust that law enforcement will conduct a thorough investigation. At this time, Ms. Karen has been temporarily relieved of board duties pending review. That was it. No acknowledgement that she had terrorized us for months. No apology for ignoring our complaints. No recognition of their role in allowing this to escalate. Just a neatly polished sentence designed to wash their hands of blood they had helped spill. Karen, meanwhile, was released on bail within 48 hours. I watched her walk out of the county holding facility on the news, hair tied back, pearls still on her neck, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Her attorney stood beside her like a shield, feeding the press vague sound bites about deep regret, trauma on both sides, and a history of neighborhood disputes that will come to light. It was like watching someone reframe a horror story into a misunderstanding. And the worst part? Some people bought it. 2 days after her release, someone spray painted the word liar across our garage door. Red paint, capital letters, dripping down like a wound that wouldn't clot. My hands trembled as I stared at it. Sophie saw it through the window before I could stop her. She didn't say anything, just turned away, pulled her blanket tighter, and went back to bed. I called the police. Again, they sent a cruiser. The officer looked tired, like he had seen one too many broken families this week. He filed a report but said the cameras didn't catch the vandal. Might have been kids, he said. Tensions are high in the neighborhood right now. As if that justified it. As if blaming a child for being shot was just another side effect of community tension. In the hospital, Sophie had nightmares. She screamed in her sleep, flinched when nurses touched her, begged me not to leave the room, even to use the bathroom. What if she comes back? She whispered one night. What if Karen brings another gun? I held her so tightly, I was afraid I'd hurt her. But what do you say to a child who's been shot in her own home by someone she once thought was safe? What words can you possibly find to rebuild a shattered sense of security? I considered moving. God, I considered it 100 times a day. Every time I pulled into our driveway, every time I passed someone who used to say hello and now barely made eye contact, every time the silence of our street echoed just a little too loudly. But something in me wouldn't let go. Why should we be the ones to leave? We hadn't done anything wrong. This was our home. Sophie's school, her garden, her room full of star stickers and fairy lights. Karen had taken enough. I wouldn't give her the rest. Not without a fight. But the victim shaming didn't stop. When I posted about the incident on social media, just a simple message asking for prayers and sharing the GoFundMe link for Sophie's medical bills, I received messages I never imagined. Strangers calling me a drama queen, accusing me of exploiting my daughter for sympathy. One anonymous account sent a direct message that read, "Maybe if you raised her better, she wouldn't have provoked anyone." I sat there staring at the screen, nausea rising in my throat. My child had been shot, and someone was blaming her. The hospital discharged Sophie after 12 days. She left in a wheelchair, still too weak to walk far. We came home to a house that felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by trauma etched into every wall. I scrubbed the red paint off the garage door myself. Took 3 hours and 3 different cleaners. My mother cried as she watched me from the porch, but I couldn't let it stay. I had to take at least one thing back. Reclaim one piece of normal. We tried to return to routine, but everything was different. Sophie wouldn't go near the kitchen where it happened. She slept with the hallway light on and the door open. The sound of keys, the beep of the fridge, even the rustle of plastic bags, all of it made her jump. And I had changed too. I checked the locks 5 times before bed, kept a baseball bat under the couch. Every sound at night sent my heart racing. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was watching, documenting, gathering, waiting. Because if the system wasn't going to protect us, then I'd protect us with the only thing I had left: the truth, the footage, the notes, the police reports, the HOA emails. I was going to tell our story, not just for Sophie, but for every family who's been silenced, blamed, or told to keep the peace while someone else holds a weapon behind a smile. They could try to shame us. They could ignore the bloodstains. They could pretend this was just a tragedy with two sides. But we knew better. And soon, the world would too. The fight didn't begin with fists or shouting. It began with a folder. A thick, digital folder filled with videos, timestamps, screenshots, written reports, printed emails, voice memos, and hospital forms. I compiled it all. Every warning Karen gave us. Every citation. Every ignored complaint to the HOA. Every night she walked by Sophie's window. Every word Sophie whispered in fear. Every second of camera footage that captured Karen standing in the dark, watching. I uploaded it all to the cloud, backed it up on a USB, and saved a copy on a hard drive I kept taped under a drawer. I wasn't taking chances anymore. This wasn't just about healing, it was about making sure people saw the truth. Not the sanitized HOA statements or Karen's smug attorney interviews, but the truth, raw, ugly, and undeniable. I consulted a lawyer 2 days after Sophie came home from the hospital. His name was Malcolm Harris, and from the moment I showed him the folder, his tone changed. He had been polite, professional. But as the videos played, as he read Karen's notes, as he listened to the audio of her voice barking at Sophie from across the lawn, something in his eyes shifted from business to fury. "This isn't a civil dispute," he said. "This is a pattern of targeted harassment that culminated in attempted murder. We're not just going after Karen. We're going after the HOA, too." I nodded. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Malcolm filed a civil suit within a week. The charges named Karen directly for emotional distress, negligence, and violence against a minor. But more than that, the lawsuit named the HOA for enabling and protecting her. We had documented emails where I had reported Karen's behavior. We had responses that brushed it off or dismissed it entirely. We had proof that they had received complaints from other neighbors and still done nothing. Karen may have pulled the trigger, but the HOA loaded the gun. And then I went public. I uploaded a video just under 7 minutes long. It began with Sophie's voice, a small, scared, "She told me I don't belong here." Then I laid it all out. Karen's pattern of stalking and threats, the night visits, the poison incident with our dog, the garage graffiti, the footage from our security cameras, and finally the trauma, the blood, the hospital. I didn't sensationalize. I didn't beg for pity. I told the story straight with facts, tears, and footage. And the internet did what the authorities wouldn't. It exploded. The video went viral within hours. Local news picked it up. Then national. Comments poured in, thousands of them. Some were kind, others heartbreaking. Parents of disabled children sent messages of solidarity. Former residents of HOA communities shared their own horror stories. But, of course, not everyone stood with us. That was when the community split. Our street, our once peaceful, overly regulated little neighborhood, was now a battlefield. Some neighbors came by quietly at night, offering support. They dropped off meals, slipped envelopes through the mail slot with words like, "We had no idea," and "We're so sorry we didn't say anything." Others? They doubled down. Signs started appearing on lawns. "Stand with Karen." Someone launched a counterpage online, calling my video one-sided propaganda. Anonymous letters showed up in our mailbox warning us to stop making the HOA look bad, or we'd regret it. The sense of isolation grew sharper, even as the online world rallied around us. One afternoon, while pushing Sophie in her wheelchair to the mailbox, a woman from 2 houses down stopped me. Her arms were crossed, jaw tight. "We moved here to escape drama," she said coldly. "Not to live next to a family that drags everyone's name through the mud for attention." I stared at her in disbelief. "My daughter was shot," I said, "in our kitchen, by someone you call a friend." She didn't blink. Maybe if you'd been less confrontational, it wouldn't have escalated. That was the moment I realized there were people who didn't want the truth. They wanted comfort. They wanted the illusion that the HOA protected them, that Karen was just misunderstood, and that we, my family, were an inconvenience, a disruption, a reminder that this community wasn't as perfect as they like to believe. But I didn't stop. Malcolm helped me file a formal petition to remove Karen permanently from the HOA board. We held a neighborhood meeting, and I presented the full case to the residents, footage, timelines, violations. Some clapped, others left midway, shaking their heads. The vote was close, but it passed. Karen was officially ousted. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she asked if the neighborhood was going to be okay now. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say the monster was gone, and we were safe. But I couldn't. Not yet, because the fight was still ongoing. Karen's criminal trial loomed ahead. Her attorney was fighting hard to get the charges reduced, claiming mental instability, temporary delusion, and even trying to spin the footage as deepfake tampering. But we had experts. We had medical reports. We had Sophie's testimony. And I would sit in that courtroom every single day, reminding them that the child she shot still couldn't sleep through the night without holding a stuffed animal and asking, "Is she in jail yet?" Our lawsuit against the HOA gained traction, too. Other families began to come forward with their own stories of bias, of ignored complaints, of board favoritism. What started as our private nightmare became a community reckoning. Some board members resigned. A few apologized. The HOA had built its power on silence, on people going along to get along. But not anymore. I didn't choose this fight. I didn't want it. All I ever wanted was a safe place for my daughter to grow up. But when someone threatens your child, when a system helps them do it, you don't walk away. You fight with evidence, with truth, with every ounce of strength you didn't know you had. And this time, we were finally being heard. The twist didn't come with fanfare or a breaking headline. It came quietly, through a phone call from Malcolm, our attorney, late one evening while I was folding Sophie's laundry and listening to her hum softly in the next room. "I need you to sit down," he said, his voice low and deliberate. My stomach dropped, he said, and then he told me. Karen had a sealed record. 15 years ago, in another state, one we'll call Rosehill County, Karen had been involved in a nearly identical incident. Another gated community, another HOA, another dispute that had spiraled into violence. She didn't shoot anyone that time, but she'd assaulted a neighbor, a disabled, elderly man, during an argument over property lines. There had been charges, restraining orders, court hearings. But the charges were eventually dropped due to a technicality and a very expensive lawyer. Her record had been sealed in a quiet settlement that included a non-disclosure agreement and financial restitution. It was buried deep, very deep. Malcolm had only found it because he used contacts in legal networks and requested sealed files through a loophole connected to public safety litigation. He was shaking when he told me. They knew, he said. Your HOA board? They knew who she was. I was stunned, frozen. How? I asked, why would they let her onto the board with that history? Malcolm had the answer to that, too: money. Karen had been donating large sums to the HOA's community fund for years, under the guise of beautification projects and neighborhood upgrades. The board had accepted the donations without blinking, and in exchange, Karen was protected, given power, given a seat at the table. I sat there staring at the wall, heart pounding. All this time, we thought Karen was the monster acting alone. But now it was clear. The HOA had enabled her because it was never about keeping order. It was about keeping control. And Karen had bought her way in. The more Malcolm dug, the uglier it got. He uncovered emails, private correspondence between HOA board members. In one, dated months before the shooting, the HOA president actually warned the others about Karen's history of volatile behavior, but quickly followed it up with, "Let's not open that box. She's our top donor this year." Another board member responded, "It's not like she's dangerous, just intense. Every board needs a bulldog." I felt sick. My daughter had nearly died, and they had joked about needing a bulldog. There was more. Malcolm traced several HOA citations in our neighborhood and found that Karen had been behind nearly 80% of the complaints filed in the past 2 years. Lawn violations, noise disturbances, sidewalk chalk. The HOA had received multiple formal complaints from residents about Karen's harassment tactics, but they were either dismissed or buried under bureaucratic jargon like insufficient cause or resolved amicably. One resident even wrote an email last year. This woman is not well. She seems obsessed with certain families. She stares through people's windows. Please investigate. The board's response? We appreciate your concern. We'll handle it internally. They never did. And it got worse. Karen had also pushed for a change in HOA bylaws 2 years ago, one that made it easier for the board to deny petitions and block investigations from non-board members. She had helped design the very rules that allowed her to get away with everything. When Malcolm presented the timeline to me, I felt like I was seeing her for the first time, not just as a villain, but as a strategist, a manipulator who had spent years creating a system where she could bully, intimidate, and eventually harm, all under the shield of regulation and community order. I couldn't stay quiet. Not anymore. I went public again, this time with the full story. I released a follow-up video, 10 minutes long. It included the newly discovered documents, the sealed record details, and the HOA board's email correspondence. I blurred names where required, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about a woman losing control. It was about a cover-up, an entire board that valued donations and order over the lives of its residents, over the safety of a child. The backlash was immediate. News outlets picked it up. Social media erupted. Former residents of the neighborhood came forward with stories of Karen bullying them out of town or being fined for fabricated violations. One man even shared how his autistic son had once been reported for loitering by Karen for sitting too long at the neighborhood park. He had moved out within a month. We knew something was off, he wrote, but we didn't think it could get this dark. The HOA board tried to respond with another polished statement, claiming they were unaware of the full scope of Karen's past and had acted in good faith. But no one was buying it anymore. The emails were public. The money trails were exposed. The residents demanded answers. Petitions to dissolve the board began circulating. Emergency meetings were held. Protest signs appeared on lawns that had once displayed "Stand with Karen" slogans. The community was divided. But now, people were waking up. The illusion of peace had been shattered. For me, the twist wasn't just betrayal. It was validation. For months, I had questioned myself. Had I overreacted? Had I misunderstood her intentions? Had I pushed too hard? But now I knew. I had been right to fear her. Right to fight. Right to speak. And all the people who stayed silent, who enabled her with their inaction or indifference, they weren't innocent. They had played a role in this too. Sophie's case gained traction with advocacy groups. Disability rights organizations reached out, wanting to help. Malcolm began building a new legal strategy, not just to pursue justice for Sophie, but to challenge how HOAs operate in silence, shielding abusive behavior under the mask of order. Our case wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was becoming a movement, and through it all, Karen remained silent. Her trial was set. Her face vanished from the community. Her house was dark, her windows boarded. The same woman who once monitored every blade of grass now hid from the world she had tried so hard to control. But I had one more message to share. In our third video update, I ended with this. Power without accountability is a weapon. Karen didn't act alone. She acted with protection, with silence, with backing. But silence ends now. We're not afraid of your rules. We're not afraid of your threats. We're not afraid of the systems you built to keep people like us small. Because we are louder, we are stronger, and we are done being quiet. This wasn't just about our home anymore. It was about every home that had ever felt unsafe behind a smile. And this time, the truth was louder than the cover-up. The community room was full to the edges, tighter than it had ever been. Folding chairs scraped against the tile, as residents packed in shoulder to shoulder, the air humming with the anticipation of confrontation. People who hadn't attended a single HOA meeting in years were now front row, cell phones out, some live streaming, others just silently watching with unreadable faces. This wasn't going to be just another discussion about lawn heights and parking guidelines. This was going to be a reckoning, and I was ready. I stood near the front of the room, camera rolling behind me. A local reporter had asked to film for the evening news. I said yes, not because I wanted attention, but because truth deserves to be documented. I wasn't going to let another carefully worded memo rewrite history. My hands shook as I held the folder, thick with evidence, photos, timelines, printouts, hospital records, and police reports. It was everything they had tried to ignore, everything they had pretended wasn't real. But tonight, they would hear it. All of it. The board sat on the raised platform at the front of the room. 5 of them, 3 in suits, 2 in pastel cardigans, fidgeted with their name placards and water bottles like students waiting for the principal. At the center was Marlene, the HOA president, the woman who had written every hollow apology and signed every dismissal letter. To her left, 2 members who had once smiled at my daughter at HOA picnics now stared firmly at their shoes. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. No meek, just my voice, trembling at first, but growing steadier with every sentence. I began with the most human piece of all, Sophie. This, I said, holding up the hospital report, is the reason we're here. This is the record of the emergency surgery that saved my daughter's life. A 7-year-old child shot in her own kitchen. This isn't drama. This isn't exaggeration. This is reality. The room was still, silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I passed the first sheet to a nearby resident and watched it move down the row of seats like a sacred document. Then I held up a photo, the image of Sophie in the ICU, her tiny frame buried in tubes and gauze. A few people gasped. One woman covered her mouth. She was targeted, stalked, harassed for months, and I reported every moment of it. I emailed this board dozens of times. I submitted evidence. I spoke at meetings. And what did you do? I turned to the board now, my eyes locked on Marlene. You dismissed it. You protected her. Because she was one of you. Marlene started to respond, some version of the same lines I'd heard before. We're deeply sorry, we followed protocol. We weren't aware of the full picture. But I didn't let her speak. I raised my hand and said, loud enough for the room to hear, you were given the picture. You chose not to look. Then I brought out the emails, one by one, printed, highlighted, time-stamped. I read them aloud. The one where Karen was defended as passionate, not threatening. The one where a fellow board member referred to my daughter's therapy sessions as community noise pollution. The one where the HOA president said, let's not escalate. We need Karen's donations this quarter. The murmurs began. People in the room shifting in their seats. Some whispered to each other. Others pulled out their phones to take photos of the documents. I saw neighbors who had never spoken to me look up with expressions of shame, realization, maybe even remorse. And then I turned to Karen's record, the sealed incident in Rosehill County. I laid it bare, the assault on the elderly man, the sealed charges, the HOA's knowledge of it all. I watched the board members' faces pale as the truth washed over the room like cold water. How many of you knew? I asked the room. How many of you were warned to stay silent? How many times did we look away? Because it was easier than standing up? The room stayed still. But now it wasn't silence of dismissal, it was the silence of shame. Then something extraordinary happened. One of the board members, Mr. Lynn, a soft-spoken man who had rarely spoken in meetings, stood up. I didn't know about Rosehill, he said, but I knew she was dangerous. And I didn't say anything. And I'm sorry. He looked around the room, then directly at me. I resign. Effective immediately. A ripple ran through the crowd. Then another board member, Ms. Alvarez, stood up too. I also resign, she said, voice trembling. I ignored what I knew because I was afraid. But what I did was wrong. It was like watching a dam break. The facade of control of HOA formality crumbling in real time. More neighbors stood, demanding answers. One man shouted from the back, "You covered for a criminal." Another added, "You let a woman with a sealed record stalk a child." The board tried to calm the crowd, but the crowd had finally found its voice. After months of Karen's domination and years of silent compliance, the community was no longer afraid. They wanted change. They wanted accountability. And right on cue, as if summoned by justice itself, two officers walked into the room. Quiet, calm, focused. One of them walked up to Marlene and handed her a notice, a formal subpoena for obstruction and complicity in an active investigation. She paled. I looked down the rows of chairs and saw the moment every face in that room realized this wasn't just a meeting, this was a consequence. As the meeting dissolved into clamor, the crowd spilling outside into the night, a soft voice tugged at my arm. Sophie, in her wheelchair. She had insisted on coming, watching from the side with my mother. Did we win? She asked, her voice small but hopeful. I knelt down beside her. We did, I whispered. Not everything. Not forever. But today we did. Because Karen had been arrested, the board had crumbled. The truth had been spoken, on camera, in public, with every ugly detail laid bare. And even though the scars would remain, on Sophie's body and my memory in our quiet home, the silence that once protected power had finally been broken. And that was the beginning of healing. Sophie's healing didn't happen all at once. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be stitched or cast or solved with a prescription. Her body healed faster than her spirit. She was always a fighter, always resilient. But the invisible wounds were slower, more stubborn. The first few weeks after the trial, she flinched every time the doorbell rang. She couldn't sleep through the night without waking up crying. Loud sounds, sirens, fireworks, even a dropped plate would send her into panic. We stopped calling them triggers and just started calling them what they were, reminders. Reminders of the day the world stopped being safe. Reminders of what she had survived. Therapy helped. A trauma counselor worked with her twice a week through play, drawing, storytelling. Slowly, she began to open up again. She told her story not just as a victim, but as a girl who stood back up after being knocked down. One afternoon, she drew a picture of a giant shadow with big red eyes and next to it, a tiny girl holding a flashlight. "That's me," she said, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. "I found the monster. And I showed people it was real. I framed that drawing. We moved 6 months after the final court hearing. Not because we were running, because we were reclaiming. We found a quiet home 2 towns away, no HOA, no surveillance, no fake smiles masking real danger. Sophie's new school welcomed her with open arms. Her teacher helped install handrails. Her classmates painted a mural with her on the first day. For the first time in a long time, I saw her walk into a room and not shrink. She still has bad days. We both do. But they're fewer now. Softer. The kind that pass with a hug or a walk in the garden. Her scars are fading. And the walker? Most days, it gathers dust in the corner. Sophie is walking more than ever, stronger than ever. She dances now. Something the doctors once said she may never do. But she does, because she's stubborn. Because she's magic. Because she believed she could. As for me, I rebuilt too. Not just my home or my trust, but my purpose. I started speaking publicly about what happened. At town halls, on podcasts, at neighborhood legal forums. I shared the footage, the failures, the cover-ups. And I started hearing from other families, mothers, fathers, renters, veterans, disabled residents who had been bullied, silenced, fined, and pushed out by HOA boards just like ours. Their stories were different, but the root was the same. Unchecked power hides behind paperwork. So I founded something, a small nonprofit, still growing, called Safe Street Voices. We provide legal resources, emotional support, and public awareness for families affected by HOA abuse. We help people fight back with facts, with community, with courage. And every family we help is a reminder that we weren't alone, that we aren't alone. Karen is behind bars now. She was convicted on multiple charges: aggravated assault, unlawful entry, endangerment of a minor. Her sentencing was long. The courtroom was packed. I sat beside Sophie as the verdict was read. Her hands didn't shake. Mine did. But the moment they said guilty, I felt something break loose inside me. Not vengeance, relief. It wasn't justice for everything, but it was justice enough to move forward. Our life now, it's quieter, gentler. We plant sunflowers in the backyard, Sophie's favorite. We cook together, laugh louder than we used to. We don't take peace for granted. Not anymore. And every time I hear Sophie laugh without fear or see her run across the yard with wind in her hair, I remind myself, we made it. Through hell, through silence, through the fire. She is healing. And so am I. Not because we forgot what happened, but because we faced it and survived. If you've watched this far, then you know this isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. What happened to my daughter should never happen to anyone, let alone a child. But the truth is, it does happen. Every day. In communities across this country, people are bullied, silenced, and pushed into fear by those who hide behind rules, titles, and fake smiles. If you've ever felt powerless, ignored, or dismissed by a system that was supposed to protect you, you're not alone. We were told to stay quiet, to not make waves, to be good neighbors. But silence nearly cost my daughter her life. And I'll never be silent again. Now, I ask you, stand with us. Speech Balloon, share this video. Brain, tell your story. Bell, subscribe to HOA denied access so we can keep exposing the lies, the cover-ups, and the unchecked power that hurts real people every single day. Because when we speak together, when we fight for those who can't, we don't just change our neighborhoods. We change the system. Let our story be your strength. Let your voice be the next one heard. And together, let's make sure no one ever has to go through this again.